Would you stand as you're able for the reading of the gospel? From Matthew's gospel in the 24th chapter. But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and being given in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field, and one will be taken, and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together, one will be taken, and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Be seated. Well, by way of confession this morning, I need to tell you that I hate thunderstorms. And the more severe the storm, the more I hate it. I don't wash the dishes, I don't do laundry, I unplug the television, I stay away from open windows and open doors. My children and grandchildren think I overreact, and they're right. But I come by my stormophobia honestly, because my mother was also terrified of thunderstorms. In the days before the Weather Channel, when it was impossible to know exactly which way a summer storm was moving, at the first sound of thunder, my mom would sometimes insist that we should just pile into the car and ride it out, because for her that was an extra layer of safety. As a result, storms were sometimes an adventure at my house, a late-night trip to the varsity for a frosted orange, perhaps, while we waited for the weather to move on. Now, my dad tried really hard to counteract the effects of my mother's fear, suggesting that my brother and I might look for the beautiful patterns in the lightning when we saw it, and encouraging us to estimate the distance from the storm by counting the time between the lightning and the thunder. So first there would be that flash, and then we would count. 1001, 1002, 1003, and then there would be the terrifying noise. When a storm began, I counted with a lot of anxiety because the time between the lightning and the thunder was getting shorter and shorter every time, until the lightning and the crash seemed to come right together. But then the numbers got higher and higher, and I would begin to relax because I knew the storm was moving away. Karl Barth, who's a 20th century German theologian, says that the church is living between the lightning flash and the thunderclap of Christian history. Between the time when God became flesh and dwelt among us and the day when the world would see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Every year on this first Sunday in Advent, we're reminded of this dimension of our story when the Bible points us toward an apocalyptic future that we cannot control. Like children in a storm, we're caught between hope fulfilled in the miracle of Christmas and God's anticipated judgment that is yet to come. It's not easy to be caught in the in-between. When I would begin to count those seconds between the lightning and the thunder, 1001, 1002, the lightning flash was already over. I was safe. Thunder isn't the part that does the harm. But the noise of that thunder, it was sometimes loud enough to shake the house, and whether it could hurt me or not, my stomach was in a knot while I waited. The gospel lesson for this first Sunday in Advent is all about watching and waiting. Noah is waiting for a deluge, and much to the amusement of his neighbors and friends, he is out building a really big boat. God has spoken. The lightning is already flashed, and the countdown to the flood is already underway. But apart from Noah's construction project, the world kept right on turning. People eat and drink, they marry, they're given in marriage. Children are born, old men die, and the work of carving out a living goes on and on. But having heard God's voice, Noah has a different way of living. He believes that God is going to do what God says. And so Noah is building a boat, even though the sun is still shining. And when the rain begins, Noah is ready. 2 men are in a field, 2 women at a mill wheel. It's an ordinary day, it's ordinary work they're doing. And then in an instant, everything changes. One is taken, the other is left behind. It's as if God is sorting out the world like a child that's dividing up the red tiles from the blue ones. You've all seen that bumper sticker interpretation of this. It says, in case of rapture, this car will be without a driver. But focusing on bumper stickers and fictional books like the Left Behind series can cause us to miss the relevance of what Jesus is trying to say. The watching and the waiting warning. 2 are working, it's the time in between. We've seen a lightning flash. This baby's been born in a manger. This man's been crucified on a cross. The tomb is empty. Christ has died. Christ is risen. And now we're people that are waiting for the thunder. Christ will come again. Some of us, the driver with the bumper sticker maybe, may be counting 1001, 1002, just to take the edge off of the anxiety. But most of us who claim that world-changing lightning flash of Jesus' birth as the story of our faith, most of us are a lot more like Noah. Just getting along with the ordinary things of life, watching our neighbor build a boat, tending our homes, our jobs, spending what's left of our day in the way that pleases us the most. Because it's been a long time since the lightning flashed. Generations have come and generations have gone, and it's as if we're no longer waiting for the thunder. And scary words about a householder who doesn't know the hour when the thief will come belong to another worldview and are easily discounted. If the householder had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have watched and would not have let his home be broken into. If the women at the mill wheel had known, they would have been ready to give account for their relationship to God and to their fellow human beings. If the church had known at what hour the Lord was coming, if the church had known, but we don't know. We don't know the hour. We don't even know sometimes whether we think there will be an hour. And so we eat and we drink, and we marry and have children, and we bury our dead until the string of life plays out. And we get ourselves to church on Sunday when the day of the week rolls around. But do we stay alert? Do we keep an eye out for new signs of God's presence? Do we live as if the kingdom of God is breaking forth among us? Are we waiting for things to change? These are good questions for the first Sunday in Advent. Back in the 1990s, I was the pastor in an in-town church in Atlanta that was not too far from Emory University. There was a young woman in that church. Her name was Tracy, and she had just finished up a degree at the University of Georgia and was working in a research lab at Emory that was focusing on the treatment of HIV/AIDS. While Tracy was a student at UGA, one of her very close friends had been murdered in an apartment near campus. And Tracy, devastated by that experience, was trying to recover a sense of meaning by reaching out to others. When she joined the church, she told me that she was interested in working with and on behalf of persons with HIV/AIDS, and she would like for us to consider starting an AIDS care team. In those days, there was no talk of living with AIDS, only dying. There was very little treatment that was available. To begin an AIDS outreach ministry was a stretch for that church because people were struggling to come to terms with that very scary illness and with the fears and the prejudices that it raised. As the pastor, I had spent some time with one of our church members whose brother was dying of AIDS. And I listened to her pain when the members of her family and the friends that she had worshiped with for years rejected him. But Tracy, our new member, she was determined. She believed that God was calling her to make this ministry happen. And so she organized a group of caregivers to take responsibility for a young man that I will call Scott. He was dying with this terrible disease. As the weeks passed, the people in the congregation worked together to prepare food, to walk Scott's dog, to drive him to doctor appointments so that his partner could continue to work. The care team took turns reading to Scott because his eyes had become so weak. They helped his partner bathe and dress him. They held his hand. They talked to him for hours, sometimes staying through the night. And when Scott was having a good day, they would pick him up and they would bring him to Sunday service. Suddenly, this disease had a name and a face, and it was sitting on the back pew on that side of the sanctuary. Tracy and her team were involved in some important work, but at the end of the day, it was really Scott who gave the congregation more than he received. You see, Scott was a man who really knew what time it was. And like so many that struggle with an incurable illness, his personal story became a powerful example about how to live in the time in between. He had learned how to keep getting out of bed every morning, putting one foot in front of the other when the lightning of that diagnosis had already flashed, and he was busy counting down until the thunderous boom that meant that his struggle was over. He knew how to make the most of every moment, seeking reconciliation in broken relationships in his life, finding ways to love in spite of all that was going on in his body. He ran circles around so many of us when it came to spending time with God, in prayers that ranged all the way from fist-shaking anger to peaceful acceptance. and he was frequently the one whose laughter and whose tears were the most touchingly real, because he knew that time was precious, and he wanted to make the most of every minute that he had. It's the first Sunday of Advent. We're living somewhere between a lightning flash of Jesus' birth and the thunderous day when Christ will come again. And the season of salvation begins with a word of warning and judgment. Keep alert. Be ready. The day and the time are not ours to know, but in between the times, we are not without choices to make. We can simply go about our business doing all those ordinary holiday things that we love to do. Or maybe we can obsessively focus our attention on cataclysmic judgment and anxiously count down the seconds. 1001, 1002. Or we can be like Scott. We can live each day with all the grace and the love that we can muster. We can seek to be faithful to the values of life in God's kingdom. We can wait hopefully for a moment we look forward to, even when we don't fully understand it, and sometimes when we don't even believe it. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. The question for us is, how do we spend our time until that promise becomes reality?